this up first. Let me make sure that that worked. Okay, so we are recording. Okay, very good. So welcome to the Bluebeam user tips and techniques session. There's on the wiki, we have a Bluebeam central location, and inside of that there's the Bluebeam FAQ. So what I did was set up the user tips section. This is what we're going to be covering in this lesson. We'll be looking at user tips primarily for working on server-based PDF documents. I'm not going to be covering working inside of studio sessions, for example. So one of the things that we use this for a lot is checking fabs, but consider this anytime that you're going to be working in documents and doing markups. The first portion of the training is going to go to setting up your work environment. We'll go over some specific steps for setting up how you're going to work. Next, we're going to look at working in multiple documents and the various options. I'm going to present 2 or 3 different ways that you can work in multiple documents, and you can adapt the ones that work for you. And the next is tips and tricks. So this will be the 3rd time I've presented this, and each time somebody's given me an additional pointer that I've been able to add into the tips and tricks section. If you wanted to follow along, this document is on the wiki underneath of Bluebeam and then the Bluebeam FAQ. So if you wanted to follow along as we go, you can do that. I'm going to move this one out of the way. So first up, let's talk about setting up your work environment. For now, I have a document open. The first thing you'll notice is that my document has the light background. Some people have theirs set up as a dark background. So there's a setting that you can change. Actually, let me make this a little smaller in case it doesn't show well on that full screen. So if you wanted to change the theme, up in Review, you can go to Preferences, and in General, under Options, there's a theme, and you can change it from dark to light. You press OK, and then that changes the theme of your background. I was used to working in Adobe, which had the light background, so I prefer to keep that. So I'm just going to switch this back for our presentation. But you can toggle that back and forth however you prefer. So I'm actually going to switch to a single page document to go over the next section about how to set up working in setting up your customized toolbars. So here, I'm just going to drag this document onto this. I'm going to go over this in a little more detail in a minute. And let me get this one out of the way and make this a little bigger. So you'll notice that there's a lot of toolbars that you can apply into your Bluebeam session. In this case, I only like to have just a minimum amount up here just to use my frequently used tools so that I can get to them easily. So the way that you set up a custom toolbar is you can go into the Tools and Toolbars. So here, you can actually pick any of the pre-made toolbars and turn them on just by selecting them. So if you wanted any of these toolbars on, you can select them and you can see how they're all populating across the top, right? Well, each of those toolbars also takes up space on the top of your screen. So what I recommend is just selecting the ones that you want to see up there. If you want to create a custom toolbar, come down to the bottom where it says Customize, and then that's going to bring up the ability to create your own custom toolbar. So over here on the right side where it says Toolbars, if you click the plus, it's going to ask you to create a name for your new toolbar. So in our case, maybe I want to name mine Markups, and then I'll press OK. So now my Markups is selected here on my toolbar, and I want to start adding some tools into it. So now that I have it selected, I'm going to go into the toolbars and categories. So these are sorted by the different types of tools. So you could list all the tools and they'll be in alphabetical order, or you can list them up by the nature of the tool. So in this case, since I'm creating a markup toolbar, I'll use the markup category, and I want to add a line because I like using a line as a highlighter. So I'm going to scroll down. These again are alphabetical. So I'll select the line, and then I'll just add that into my toolbar. Then I'll scroll up and I want to put the arrow in there, and maybe the call out, and probably the text box down below. And just by selecting them and moving them over, I've got them in my toolbar now. So if I put something in and I don't really want that, if let's say I stuck this review text over there, I can just delete it out of there with that X. Otherwise, if I want to change the sequence of these, I can select them and then just move that up or down with that arrow on the side, and that'll create the order that they appear. So now that I have these 4 tools selected, I'll just press OK, and that'll put that toolbar up here, because if I go to Tools and Toolbars, now my Markups toolbar is selected. This is from a previous session. So this is the one I just built. So now these 4 tools are on here. When you're setting up your toolbar, you can customize what each of the tools is doing. So for example, if I drew the arrow on here and it made that red highlighted line, or the default, it's going to just make an arrow with an arrow point on the end, but I wanted to change the behavior of what I want that tool to look like. I'm going to go over and select Properties. And because I have that tool selected, it's going to allow me to change whatever I want to. So I can change the color of it. I can change how opaque it gets if I wanted to make it more or less opaque. I can change if I wanted to create it as some kind of a dashed line, if I wanted to put the arrow ends back on it. So all of those are options. Once I made that tool how I wanted it, then if I wanted to keep this so that every time I select it, it creates this exact markup, then I would just select Set as Default. And so now every time that you use that tool, it's going to come in with that mark. So for example, this tool, I've already established my default for that, and it comes in how I have it set up from that menu that same way each time. One of the tools that we're using as we create markups, for example, sometimes we'll use the green line and make multiple marks on that. So for example, if we were checking all of these dimensions as we go, we'd like to be able to mark those up without selecting that tool over and over again. So the way that you do that is inside of the Tools menu, you select Reuse. and that reuse button allows that tool to be used over. So now that I've just deselected it, I can only make one, and then I have to select a tool again. So I'm going to go back and select it so that if I wanted to put my text box in over and over, that's the way I would do it. If you have reuse selected and you're doing a markup like a text box, a lot of times you're just going to be doing a single text box and you don't want to do a whole bunch of them in a row. But this command is still selected even though I was typing inside that box. So to escape out of there, you can hit the escape button and that'll clear it out. So that's one way to get out of there. The other thing you can do is you can, after you type in your text, you can select a different tool. So if you were going to go to that other tool, or the third option is after you type in your text, you can save it. So if you hit Control S, that'll save it and that'll escape. It'll save the notes that you made and it'll escape out of there. So it'll give you the pan tool. So now you're ready to grab your next toolbar. If you're in here and you're making changes to your settings, sometimes that change, so for example, if I had made this my default, it might only stick for this session because I have multiple sessions open. And the next time you opened your Bluebeam, it would have your normal markup defaults in there. So if you do want to save these as your default settings, so for example, if I was in here in my properties and I wanted to set as default, but I wanted to keep these the next time I opened it, the technique there is actually to close all the other documents and just do your markups in this one document. Then after you do your set as default, you can close this session, and the next time that you open a session, it'll maintain those settings that you had. So again, there's inside of the toolbars, you can turn on or off as many toolbars as you want. So if you wanted the edit toolbar to come up, you can select that and it'll add those tools to it. One of the things about the custom tools, especially in this markup, so I'm going to add another tool into this list right now. So if I go into Tools and Toolbars and Customize, inside of the markup, there's a dimension. That one's very handy. And this is not a measuring tool. This is actually just hold on, I think I added it to the wrong toolbar. I need to select my markups. There, yeah, I was on the wrong toolbar. So now you see I added it inside of my folder and it popped right up on my toolbars menu. So the dimension is actually just a way if you wanted to do a markup on what this dimension should be, you can actually just use that dimension tool, type in the number that you want to see, and it pops up there. There are a variety of measurement tools available as well, which we're not going to cover in this session. But this is a handy markup tool to be able to show specifically that you want this dimension to show up. And it's a lot faster and easier than just doing lines and numbers in a text box like you had to do in Adobe. All right, so next up, we're going to talk about working in multiple documents. If you're, let's say in this case, I've got the set of shop drawings open And I'm using the shop drawings to be able to see what's happening on my particular units, and then navigating around that way and just using the shop drawings like normal. So one of the techniques, if you want to have another document open, but to be able to have separate controls for the document. So basically, I want this in a new session. I'm going to keep my shop drawing open in this session here. Then I'm going to open a new session. So if you haven't pinned the program to your desktop, you should do that so that it's easily available. So if you have the program open, you can right-click on it and just pin it to your taskbar. So I would recommend doing that so that you can open multiple sessions of Bluebeam. So to open a new session, it acts like most Windows programs. If you have a session open, you can just hover over your icon and click the mouse wheel, and it opens up another session for you. So you'll notice that it opened in the same way that I closed that previous session. So I had my properties window open before. So now my properties window is open here. If I had everything closed out and it was just kind of a bare document, when I closed everything, that's how the next session would open up as well. So if I want to see what I'm doing for my unit here, I've got my session open, and now I'm going to just open the folder location where that unit is stored, and I'm going to just drag that file. So I just left-clicked and dragged it on, and now that's going to open up that document right on that session that I have open. When you're working on fab tickets that have linked fabs, when you click on a linked mark number, a hyperlink, it's going to open that in a new tab right there in that same session where this thing is open. So you can have multiple sessions open. If I wanted to see shop drawings over here, key sheets. Oh, sorry. I can have the key sheets popping up over here, and then I can have my unit drawing. And these are all open in separate sessions. So one of the ways that you can work inside of a linked drawing is you actually click on it and it opens it in the tab, and you'll see it'll open as many times as you open that up. Then it'll open up a new tab for you so you can see all of those documents. If you're okay seeing them on the same screen and just tabbing back and forth between your unit drawing and your mark numbers, this is an easy way because it gives you all of your tools that you normally see are available up at the top, and you would just use those to mark up in that same session. Sometimes that may not work with your workflow, so there's multiple other ways to work in multiple documents. So we're going to take a look at a few of those right now. One of the methods that I experimented with was opening up a new session so that I've got a blank session available here, and I've got my unit. In this case, it's unit 499. This is open on this session, but I really want to be able to see the unit drawing in its own session and all of the fabs that I'm working with on a different session. So I'm actually going to open up a read-only copy. So in Bluebeam, you'll get a notification if that file is already open, unlike Adobe where you could have something open and try to save it and then it just wouldn't save. This will tell you if you're opening it read-only. So it even labels it as copy. So you've got a lot of great features there so you can see that this is a copy. So if I like seeing my unit drawing here because I want to be able to use my dimensions and my detail bubbles as I'm looking through individual parts, I'll just leave this one open in its own session. And now on this one, which is my active file, I can open up that fab ticket with the link and it opens on a new tab. So this remains open, but now I can actually do the markup here because I'm looking over here to see what was happening on that unit. So that's one method that you can use for opening side by side. So another option, let me close this one out and make this one bigger. Okay, so another option, if you wanted to see multiple pages on the screen at the same time, you can actually use these split vertical and split horizontal methods. So if I use the split vertical, for example, it opens up both of these and it's the same document. So if I made a mark and saved it on here, it synchronized so that it's doing that same mark on both sides. Now, you may notice that if you scroll in on this, let's see, okay, there's a setting in here that allows me to do this. You actually see what I did was I was able to scroll in on this one side and this side is not affected. That's because I'd selected this earlier. So over in View, you can scroll down, and if you have synchronized document selected, if you zoom in on the one, it's going to zoom in on the other. If you click in on the one, it actually wants to open it on both sides. Now that wasn't quite that. But the view actually, it's easier to track if you don't have them synchronized, so that now if I have this open, I can look at my unit drawing here. But now when I open this one and click on it here, it opens it up in a tab on that half of the window. So this is another way to view documents, multiple documents at the same time. This is a side-by-side method, but you only have the one set of toolbars available. So if you like working in the split screen and you have the toolbars close to the top where you're used to working so that you can grab them and mark on your document, this one you have to navigate a little further to get to the tools that you're used to if you're working on the other half of the screen. So if you have multiple sessions open and you have multiple documents open inside of that session, one of the things about Bluebeam is that if you go down here and hover over your icon, it gives you the thumbnails of what you have open. However, it only shows you what you have open on the top, what's selected. So in this case, it won't show you that there's 3 documents open in this session, but it only shows you that one that's active. So this one has 2 other documents associated with it, but it won't show all 3 of those in that little thumbnail view. So that's just a way that you'll have to get used to navigating as you're tracking through multiple pages. So that's a summary of how to do the working in multiple documents at the same time. Next section, we're going to work on the tips and tricks. So we're going to look at quite a few items here. I'm going to unsplit this so that now I have separate sessions open. So in this case, I have my shop drawings over here, and then I have my fab tickets over here. If you're working on a fab ticket and let's say you're doing a markup, you can use the Control S to save and then look at the file name when I do that. So it flashes red as it saves. And then if you, let's say you were doing this and you just hit the close button on the tab, it's going to prompt you to save, don't save, or cancel. That's pretty normal for Windows programs. So in this case, I'm just going to cancel. And then when I hit the, if I make marks and if they're not saved yet, the program actually gives me a little feature here. You see this little asterisk next to the file name. That is the indicator that that file has something on it that's not saved. So you've got that really easy visual inside of your tab. So now if I hit Control S or hit the Save button up here, whatever your preference is, once it's saved, then you'll see that that goes away. When I was first starting on this in Windows 7, if I had several marks and I tried to hit Control S and Control W too quickly, because I use Control W to close the window, it'll pop up with a little warning that says that you haven't saved it yet. So in that case, you just give it a fraction of a second to save, and then you can close it either with the tab or the Control W if you like the keyboard shortcut. So one of the settings is that if you open a file from a folder, if you have settings set up a particular way, it'll actually open to how it was zoomed in when it was closed, regardless if you saved it or not. So for example, if I just looked at this file, even if I zoomed in to this area and I didn't save it, depending on my settings, when I open this again, it would just zoom into that area. So you can actually change that setting so that it just opens the document in a more normal format each time. So if you go to, this blocked a little bit my screen, I'm going to minimize this a little so I can get to the menu. So if you go into the Review and Preferences, then you go General, and then Document. Down here at the bottom, it's going to have this Remember Last Page. So if that's selected, that's when it'll open up in that zoom session. So if you deselect it, it'll open it in a more normal manner. And by the way, there's a lot of things you can change inside of your preferences. So in navigation, for example, you can change the way that your wheel works with scrolling and zooming. For me, I like to set mine up so that I hit Control and use the mouse wheel to zoom in. So I just set it up as scroll for the mode, and then I can use that other command when I'm actually zooming. So there's a lot of ways to customize the behavior. That's one example. So one of the ways that we use Bluebeam a lot is we're checking unit drawings, and let me open up another example of a unit drawing. Let me open up another one that's maybe got less markups on it. Oh, they all do. Let's do this. So you saw I quickly got rid of all the marks that were on there. I just hit Control-A, it selected everything, and then I just hit the delete button. That's something that you couldn't do in Adobe either. But in this case, if you're marking up a unit assembly drawing, for example, and you click on this, it actually opens up your fab ticket, etc. But let's say I've checked that and I want to mark off that it's complete and I've looked at it. Our normal process is we would actually just draw a line through the whole thing like this. But what happens in Bluebeam is when you go to select that, it wants to select the mark when you're actually hovering near it. So that makes it a little difficult if you want to go back and revisit that fab ticket. So we're starting to get into the practice of just marking a portion of that mark number. So now when you click on that, you have an open spot where you can get in there and actually click on it, have it open up the link, rather than having it grab the actual markup. So next tip is for zooming and panning. Let me bring this over to like a half screen. So if you select this one full page, then that allows you to use the control and the wheel to zoom back and forth. But again, those settings can be adjusted in your main menu as well. So you can decide what your preference is for zooming and panning. Select that. If you have that as the last session that you have open, where it's just that one session, you make those settings and then you close the program, then they'll stick the next time you open it up. So for my next one, I actually need to turn my regular toolbar back on. And I want to turn off some of these other ones that I don't really need. So here, if I was making, let's say I was doing a text box and I was typing in some kind of a note that I wanted to point out. Well, sometimes if that note doesn't fit where I'm trying to place it, one of the neat features, I can actually rotate that. So you see there's a little handle up above. I can just grab that and then rotate that text however I want to be able to fit it onto the page. So that's a very handy feature that Adobe just didn't have. One of the other very common tools that we use is the call out. So when you select the call out, when you go to place it, wherever you put your cursor is where it's going to put the tip of the arrow. So I'm going to place it right here next to this number. And then as you drag this over so that you can put text in this box, that arrow tip is anchored. So I can move the box anywhere where it's convenient for me to be able to place the text, and it'll stick in that spot. Now, after I place that, I can, of course, adjust it. I can make the box smaller or bigger. If I wanted to go into the properties and make this fill or no fill, there's a lot of things I can do inside of there. At this point, this is anchored, but if I wanted to move this to where it's pointing to something else, I just pick it by the point, move it to the new thing, and then even if I wanted to move that box around so that it was easier to read, then it's still going to remain anchored at the arrow point. So earlier we talked a little bit about the dimension tool. So we might use the dimension tool frequently on a unit drawing that may be missing some dimensions. So the way that you hold the dimension will actually determine if it looks like it wants to go up, down, left, or right. So if you start on this side and move to the right, and if you hold the shift, it keeps it snapped. This looks as if you wanted to mark it with the dimension and you're dimensioning something above. So now you have the lines that are going above. You can also adjust the lengths of these lines. So you can select this and then you can drag it up and it'll make your leader lines longer if you wanted to be able to adjust what your dimension, how far down it's going. So that's one direction. Then if you go the other direction, it says from right to left, it's as if you're dimensioning something that's up above. And then similar when you're going from the bottom up, it's as if you were marking on the left side of something, and then your dimension follows, this automatically put the dimension in that vertical orientation because the dimension tool is oriented vertically. And then same thing, if I wanted to dimension something here on the right side, it would be top down. So those are some ways that the dimension tool works, just some of the mechanics of it. Again, it's a very handy tool for just doing markups. So let's say I have quite a few marks on this page. And one of the things that I'll occasionally do is I'll want to copy some of these notes onto another drawing. So there are several ways to select some of your markups to be able to copy them and paste them. One of them that's very handy is the select tool. So when you use the select tool, it works very similar to what AutoCAD does. So if you select from, you're making a box, for example, you're going from the bottom up. And if you're going from the bottom up like this, then anything that you cross is actually selected. Where if you select it and you go from the top down, anything that's completely inside of the box is selected. So you'll notice I didn't completely surround these green lines, so they weren't selected. So that's an easy way to select multiple items. And from here, I can do a Control-C and copy that. I can go to another unit. And now when I want to paste, where I put the cursor is where it's going to paste, and usually with the lower markup on there. So now if I hit Control-V and paste, you'll see that those pasted notes came in right next to my cursor, where in Adobe, they would just populate the screen and they would just keep stacking instead. So this is a very precise way to place your notes. And even if you wanted to do adjustments afterwards, you can move both of them at the same time if they're still selected. So if you wanted to place them precisely like that, you can do it. Or if you escape out of that, you can move them individually afterwards if you wanted to do a slight adjustment because of the nature of your markup. If you want to select multiple items for copying, in addition to being able to use that select tool, sometimes you may want to select this item and then this item. So in that case, you would hit the Shift button. And after you select Shift, you select your second or your third or however many things you want to add into your selection, and then you can copy those. So this is completely different than Adobe, which uses Control if you're adding multiple items onto your selection. This uses Shift instead. So then you can copy those, and now I could take these, and again, depending on where I put my mouse, I'm going to place those, and they're going to paste next to where the mouse was located. So if I put my mouse way over here and I paste those again, it's going to paste them way over there on the page. So that helps you to be able to get your markups where you want them quickly and efficiently, just knowing that they place where your mouse is. One of the tools, this is a different type of a tip here. One of the tools that you can have on your toolbar is the polyline. So in this case, if you just click each point, then it makes your polyline for you. Now, I like to use this rectangle so that I can, just make a box around something. A lot of times I'll use this on the key sheet so I can see which unit I'm working on. So that means that my rectangle tool is customized. But I discovered that if you use the polyline tool and you just hit the left mouse button while you make the polyline, it'll actually create a rectangle instead of the individually lengths of the lines for your polyline. So again, that's just the polyline selected, hold the left mouse, and then drag it around, and then it'll make a rectangle. And you can move the mouse up and down, left and right to size it how you want, if you want to use just a regular line for a rectangle. So one of the other things that comes in handy, let's say I was checking these and this glass chart was correct and it should have been the same as I saw on this other one, but they were different for some reason. Or I had a markup that I wanted to copy onto another page. There's a tool called Snapshot. Now I have mine in my toolbar already, but I'm going to show you how to find it in the menu. So the Snapshot tool, if you go to Edit and select Snapshot, it gives you this little rectangle. So if I'm going to select this area where it says glass, I'm just going to box around that and then watch as I let go of the left mouse wheel, it's going to flash. And that means it's copied onto the clipboard. So now I didn't have to hit Control-C or anything. It's just there. Now when I hit Control-V and paste it in, it's going to actually paste. So I didn't follow my own advice. I didn't keep my mouse where I wanted it to paste. So if I hit Control-V and paste, sorry, I did too many undo steps there. Let's do this again. So I have mine set up on my toolbar, but again, you can go to Edit and Snapshot to select it. Box around the area you want. That'll be copied. Now when I want to place it here, I'm just going to hit Control-V and it's going to place it right on my document. And I can still move it around if I need to. One caution here though is that this looks identical to what the document I just copied it off of. So if I just stuck this right on top of this, I may not be able to tell what that was. So if you're using this as a markup tool, I would recommend doing some kind of a highlight here and just making some kind of a note that is indicating that you did this markup because you want it to match. So occasionally as we're doing our checking process, we'll be going through other units and we'll find that there's a file that has enough information that we think we want to be able to show that entire file to the person that's using this document so that they can just actually open it rather than just doing a snip, for example. So there's a method that we can use to actually hyperlink directly onto an open drawing. So in this case, I have some markup here, and let's do this. So let's say I wanted to do a red line markup here, and I wanted to put a specific file that would indicate what I want to see here. So I would just go in after doing my research and determining which file I wanted to put in there. I would just take that from the file location, and again, this is just an example, but then I would grab that as if I was going to open it, and then if I just hover near that markup, you see how the little plus became an arrow. So now when I let go, it creates this little lightning bolt symbol. So now when I click on that, it actually opens that specific PDF. So I would just basically, I just drug that on there. So the file itself is accessible just by clicking on that link. And if you hit save, it'll save it on there. If you close it out before saving, then your link won't be saved on there either. So next up, we're going to look at some searching features. And then we've got a few additional tips past that. So I'm going to actually move over to key sheets right now for doing searching. So if you want to do a search, you just select the search here and you make the decision here of what you want to search. In most cases, if you're just searching on the document you have open, you'll just leave this as current document. But you can actually select a folder and navigate to a specific folder and have it search every document in that folder for anything that you're looking for. So it'll open up all of the files, it'll look at all of the text on all of those documents, and it'll give you the search results. And then inside of the results, they'll come up down here. You can actually click on them here and it'll open that document, whatever folder it found it in, and it'll show up here. So that's really just a description. I don't have time to actually do those tasks, but just recognize that that's a powerful search feature. For our main use of the search, we're going to just search the current document. So in this case, I'm going to search for this U035. So that tells me, this is a unit drawing, this is a key sheet I'm working on. This tells me that on this page, and it's actually week 4, day 4, we've got a lot of data associated with generating how unit numbers show up on key sheets. So it actually shows me the location of the mark that it's looking for, but it's also showing me all this related data that's associated with it. So if I click on this, you can see it actually takes me to that spot. So let me, I'm going to have to reopen this. So sometimes on big documents, you're zooming in and out might cause it to flash out like this. So let me close this out. Okay, bear with me a second while I find that file again. So I'm going to open up a session. And then once my session's open and I've got my folder location, I'm just going to drag that on there and that's going to open it. In this case, you see it wanted to read it, open it read only because it's open in some other place. So now I'm going to do my, minimize this a little bit. So I'm going to do my search for U035, and it's going to come up with all of the occurrences of that unit on this specific document, since I have current document selected. So it searched through, and you see it's got a pretty good list, and let me make that so you can see the, so there's 48 results in this case. So here, if I select this, it's actually going to jump right to that spot. And you can see it shows me that that is in that spot. So one of the ways that I'm using this is sometimes there's multiple locations of a unit, and I want to make sure that they're all exactly correct for all of the conditions. So I'll select that unit. After I investigate this on the shop drawings and I agree that that is correct for that spot, I'm going to put a check mark in this box right here. And I'm going to show you why in a second. Now I'm going to select the next occurrence of that, and you can see that's in this spot right here. Okay, great. I've investigated that. I agree that that's correct. Now I'm going to select the next one. Okay, good. Those are all good occurrences of those. So this is on another page, and this is on a different week. So I don't really want to look at those, so I'm not going to look at that. So I'm not going to select that one. So I'm going to go back to this one. Okay, yes, I actually did check that one, and I agree. So those three, I'm good. So I've made those selections. Now this was just to visualize. You could see where they're at. So one of the tools that's very handy here is when you create a checkbox here, you can actually go into this feature where it says check options. It comes up with a little drop-down menu, and the way I've been using it is just hitting this highlight checked. So now, even though I've got 48 of these, I've really determined that these three are the ones that I'm looking at in this particular moment. Now I might look at some more later, and then these will already have been yellowed out when I look at it. So if I did this search again, and it came up with these same results, and I'm looking here, then I can see, oh, well, this one's an XREF, so I'm not going to select that one. So then I go to this end. Oh, okay, this one's good. I actually do want that one, so I'll select that one. And I'll go to here, and I'll see it's highlighted already. I'm like, okay, I don't need to check that one again. So now it's really just this one that I'm checking on this week, and I'll go to highlight checked, and it's only going to highlight that one that I have checked at that particular time. So this is a very powerful tool to be able to use key sheets, keep track of where you're at, and be extremely accurate in your work. There's additional tools in here as well. So you can apply counts to checks, which allows you, it's got some built-ins, so you can do these check marks. When we did our first experiments though, if we applied these, it actually puts a big mark on there and it makes it harder to see the mark number. So we experimented a little bit more. You can customize this, which I don't have time to go into, but you can apply this count feature. And then if you wanted to count this, you can use a right click and open up this little pop-up note, and it tells you how many you've got counted. But that's only on this specific sheet. So I haven't investigated this to a deep level to make it combine multiple sheets, but we saw that there are a lot of options for that as well. It's just not something that I found the immediate need for, but another great way that we can continue to explore using Bluebeam. Another search feature is you can actually search for images. Amy covered this when she did her session. So let's say I wanted to see what's happening inside of my grid lines. I can just select over here for the visual, select the get rectangle, select that area, and then I can select the sensitivity high or low and have it determine, it will search to see what things are similar to this. So if it's a high sensitivity, then it'll only get the ones that have like the same lettering and everything in there. But if it's a low sensitivity, it'll give me the results that are in a similar, like inside of this circle, and there's a character inside of there. So I'm going to cancel that because it's going to take a little time to do that particular search. But just another way you can use that searching feature. So let's take a look at bookmarks for a minute. So if you select bookmarks from your list here, the page that you're on, you can navigate to any page by selecting the bookmark. And you can see that it puts this little caveat here next to the page that you have open. So let's say you're on this 202A and you're trying to zoom in with your wheel, but you miss a little bit and you wind up navigating and scrolling around different pages. You can see my pages are moving around in the background, but over here you can see my caveat actually just shows me which page I'm on, 201I for example. And then because I hadn't clicked on anything on my document, it shows me where I started over here on the 202A. So I can go back and navigate back to that 202A again if I want by selecting it from that bookmark tree. Okay, so we're closing out on time. I've got 3 or 4 additional items here. So there's a way to do a compare documents as well. If you had 2 documents that you wanted to compare side by side, let me close out some of these. So this one's got a whole bunch of stuff open. I'm just going to close that one out. I'm going to open up a new session. And then let me navigate back to my folder here. So I'm going to open up this unit. If I'm doing a duplicate unit, for example, and I have this unit 1603 that was checked on a previous week, and I want to compare it to another unit 1603 that's on a different week to see if anything changed in the meanwhile, well, of course, I can open them side by side and just look at them. But there's also a comparison tool that I can use. So I can select the document, and then inside of the document window, I've got the ability to do compare documents. So now that's going to open up the window. The document A is the one I have open already. And then the document B, the easiest way is actually just to go to the folder where that document B is living, which in this case is here. I'm going to copy that folder name, and then I'm going to browse for it, but now I can just paste that location, and then now I can find that file. It's the same file name in this case, and then hit open. Now that they're showing both of those, they're in different folders. I'm going to allow it to do the comparison. So I'm just hitting the OK. Let me blow this up, make this bigger. And now it's, I didn't select to check the markups, otherwise it would have made the note that all of my green lines are slightly different from document to document. I really just wanted to see what's happening with how the document was created. So in this case, you can see that on this one, it's the same mark number, but it's on this side of the vertical line, and this side it's over here. Same thing here, the detail bubble is below, where in this case it's above. So if I was just doing a straight comparison, I would not make any changes to these documents because all of the mark numbers matched. So that's a way to do side-by-side comparison. And then you can close that out without saving if you want. And it's going to ask you if you want to save it because it's got these marks on there. So I'm just going to close that out instead. Okay, so just a couple minutes left. If you, let's say you have a document open and you want to indicate that this also should have been a hatch. If you have a closed polyline, like a rectangle or circle, whatever, you can actually add in your tools. You can go to toolbars, and then this appearance toolbar. It gives you the ability to select your closed polyline, and then you can hatch it. You can select this hatch pattern. So if you wanted to indicate that that should have been hatched, you can actually just put a hatch pattern right on there. That's one that somebody showed me after the last session. So you'll also notice that there's, you have a lot of icons running down the side of your screen here. So if you, for example, you never use this one called spaces, you can right click on that and then just hit hide, and then now it'll hide that. If later you decide that you want to see that, you can right click on an area that's open and just go to the show, and this will allow you to show any of the normal items that show up on that left menu. So if I wanted that back on, I would just turn it back on and it would show up. And then you can actually adjust where these go. So you can drag them into whatever sequence you want. If I wanted to have that in that particular spot, I just drag it to that spot. So that takes care of that one, and that one. So that's pretty much all we have time for. I did record this session, so I will try to get this up onto our training page sometime in the near future in case you wanted to go back and reference it. But again, all of these specific tips are on the wiki, and they're on the Bluebeam FAQ under user tips, and they're broken up by categories for setting up, working multiple documents, and then tips and tricks. So hopefully everybody found that that gives them some additional options for being able to work hands-on in the Bluebeam session and to be able to get comfortable using this new software. So thanks everybody for attending, and have a good afternoon.